Welcome to FA Cup Files, ESTD 1871, where football's oldest trophy tells its greatest stories. Step into history with FA Cup Files, a tribute to grit, glory, and the birth of the beautiful game. Since 1871, legends have been made. FA Cup Files brings you the stories time tried to forget.
George Graham, 1986–1995. FA Cup wins, 1, 1993. Known for defensive solidity and discipline, won the FA Cup and League Cup double in 1993. George Graham, born the 30th of November, 1944, is a Scottish former football player and manager. Nicknamed Stroller, he made 455 appearances in England's Football League as a midfielder or forward for Aston Villa, Chelsea, Arsenal, Manchester United, Portsmouth and Crystal Palace. Approximately half of his appearances were for Arsenal, and he was part of the side that won the Football League Championship and FA Cup double in 1971. Graham also made 17 appearances for California Surf in the Nozzle in 1978. He then moved to the coaching staff at Crystal Palace, before joining former Palace manager Terry Venables as a coach at Queen's Park Rangers. As a manager, he won numerous honours with Arsenal between 1987 and 1995, including 2 league titles, in 1989 and 1991, the 1993 FA Cup, 2 Football League Cups, in 1987 and 1993, as well as the 1994 European Cup Winners' Cup. He also managed Millwall, Leeds United and Tottenham Hotspur. He was one of the most successful managers in Arsenal's history, remaining in charge for almost a decade until he was sacked by the club's board after being found guilty by the Football Association of taking money from transfers. Graham was banned despite paying back the money, which he always claimed was an unsolicited gift. The youngest of 7 children, Graham was born at Dykehead Road, Barge Dye, near Coatbridge on Thursday the 30th of November, 1944. He grew up in poverty and was raised by his mother, Janet, the 26th of April, 1908 to the 27th of March, 1977, after his father, Robert Young Graham, born the 22nd of June, 1900, died of tuberculosis and heart failure on Christmas Day 1944, when George was not yet a month old. His elder sister also died of tuberculosis on the 22nd of February, 1950. While growing up, Graham showed considerable promise as a footballer, and Newcastle United, Chelsea and Aston Villa displayed an interest in signing him. Bertie Mee's Arsenal were looking for a replacement for Joe Baker and paid £50,000 plus Tommy Baldwin in 1966 to bring Graham to Highbury. He made his debut on the 1st of October, 1966 at home to Leicester City, and although the result was a 4-2 defeat, he immediately became a regular in the Arsenal side. He was Arsenal's top scorer in both 1966–67 and 1967–68, having started out as a centre-forward for the club, but later moved back into midfield as an inside forward, with John Radford moving from the wing to central striker. With Arsenal, Graham was a runner-up in both the 1968 and 1969 League Cup finals, before finally winning a medal with the 1969–70 Intercities Fairs Cup. He followed it up with being an integral part of Arsenal's double-winning side of 1970–71, and even had a claim to scoring Arsenal's equaliser in the FA Cup final against Liverpool, although Eddie Kelly is officially credited with the goal. Winning the double brought the attention of Scotland, and Graham was selected for the national side for the first time against Portugal on 13 October 1971. He would go on to win 12 caps over the next 2 years for Scotland, scoring 3 goals, his final one coming against Brazil on the 30th of June, 1973. By then, however, Graham was no longer an Arsenal player. The arrival of Alan Ball midway through 1971–72 had made his place in the Arsenal side less assured. In total, he played 308 matches for Arsenal, scoring 77 goals. His final appearance was on the 4th of November, 1972, when he came on as a substitute against Coventry City. Graham's achievements at Millwall attracted attention from First Division clubs, and with the resignation of Don Howe as Arsenal manager in March 1986, their directors first offered the job to FC Barcelona coach Terry Venables, but he rejected their offer, and Arsenal switched their attention to Alex Ferguson, the Aberdeen manager, as their new manager, with Graham as his assistant. However, Ferguson, then in temporary charge of the Scotland national football team following the death of Jock Stein the previous September, and still in charge of Aberdeen, had decided to wait until after the World Cup that summer before deciding on his future. Graham himself had never even applied for the Arsenal position 11, but on the 12th of May, 1986 his chairman at Millwall, Alan Thorne, told him that Arsenal wanted to speak to him about the manager's job. After an interview with Peter Hillwood, David Dane, and Ken Fryer at Hillwood's home, the Arsenal directors appointed Graham as their new manager on 14 May 1986, a month after arriving at Highbury. Graham was himself linked with the Scotland national team, possibly combining it with the Arsenal manager's job, 13, but that role went to Andy Roxburgh instead. Arsenal had not won a trophy since the FA Cup in 1978-79, and were drifting away from the top teams in the league, having not finished in the top 5 during any of the previous 4 seasons, during which the major honours were picked up by an all-conquering Liverpool as well as the likes of Manchester United and Everton. Graham quickly discarded the likes of Paul Mariner, who already had been released on a free transfer, Tony Woodcock, Stuart Robson and Tommy Cotton, and replaced them with new signings and youth team products. He also imposed much stricter discipline than his predecessors, both in the dressing room and on the pitch, and told the team he expected them to be dressed in club blazers on match day, for Arsenal's form immediately improved, so much so that the club were top of the league at Christmas 1986, the club's centenary, for the first time in a decade. However, Graham said he knew the team weren't ready to mount a sustained title challenge, 14. This was proven to be correct as Arsenal finished 4th in Graham's first season in charge, but they went on to win the 1987 League Cup, beating Liverpool 2-1 at Wembley on the 5th of April. The key players in the upturn were young defender Tony Adams and high-scoring winger Martin Hayes. While Arsenal lost the League Cup final the following year, a shock 3-2 defeat to Luton Town, they remained consistent in the league. Graham's side featured tight defensive discipline embodied by his young captain Tony Adams, who along with Lee Dixon, Steve Bold and Nigel Winterburn, would form the basis of the club's defence for over a decade. However, contrary to popular belief, during this time Arsenal were not a purely defensive side. Graham also built up an impressive midfield containing David Rocastle, Paul Davis, Michael Thomas and Paul Merson, and striker Alan Smith, whose prolific goal-scoring regularly brought him more than 20 goals per season. At the end of Graham's third season, 1988-89, the club won their first league title since 1971, when Graham had been an Arsenal player, in highly dramatic fashion, in the final game of the season against holders and league leaders Liverpool at Anfield. Arsenal needed to win by 2 goals to take the title. Alan Smith scored early in the second half to make it 1-0, but as time ticked by Arsenal struggled to get a second, and with the 90 minutes elapsed on the clock, they still needed another goal. With only seconds to go, a Smith flick-on found Michael Thomas surging through the Liverpool defence. The young midfielder calmly lifted the ball over Bruce Grobbelaar and into the net, and Arsenal were league champions. However, there was no chance to enter the European Cup just yet for Graham's team, as the ban on English clubs in European competitions, which was imposed by UEFA in 1985 following the Heysel disaster, continued for another season. After finishing 4th in 1989-90, Graham signed goalkeeper David Seaman and Swedish winger Anders Limpar in the close season. Both players proved vital as Arsenal won a second title in 1990-91 and reached the FA Cup semi-finals, losing to arch-rivals Tottenham Hotspur. They lost just 1 league game all season, their 24th match of the league campaign against Chelsea on the 2nd of February. Arsenal finished ahead of runners-up Liverpool in the race for the league title that season. In February 1991, the Liverpool manager Kenny Dalglish had suddenly announced his resignation as manager, and Graham's name was among those mentioned by the media as a possible successor to Dalglish. However, Graham was quick to rule himself out of the running, and the job instead went to another Scot, Graham Souness. In the autumn of 1991, Graham went on to sign a striker who would break the club's all-time top-scoring records, Ian Wright from Crystal Palace, and led the club into their first entry in the European Cup for 20 years. However, the continental adventure was short-lived. Arsenal were knocked out by SL Benfica in the second round and failed to make the lucrative final stages. 1991-92 brought more disappointment when the Gunners were knocked out of the FA Cup in the third round by lowly Wrexham, though Arsenal did reasonably well in the league, finishing 4th. After this season, Graham changed his tactics. He became more defensive and turned out far less attack-minded sides, which depended mainly on goals from right rather than the whole team. Between 1986-87 and 1991-92, Arsenal averaged 66 league goals a season, scoring 81 in 1991-92, but between 1992-93 and 1994-95 only averaged 48, this included just 40 in 1992-93, when the club finished 10th in the inaugural season of the FA Premier League, scoring fewer than any other team in the division. Graham's Arsenal became cup specialists, and in 1992-93 they became the first side to win the FA Cup and League Cup double, both times beating Sheffield Wednesday 2-1 in the League Cup final and 2-1 in the FA Cup final replay. The next season they continued in the same vein, winning the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup. In the final, Arsenal beat favourites and holders Parma 1-0 with a tight defensive performance and Alan Smith's 21st-minute goal from a left-foot volley. The 1994 Cup Winners' Cup proved to be Graham's last trophy at the club. It was on the 21st of February, 1995 that Graham, who had led Arsenal to 6 trophies in 8 seasons, lost his job after a Premier League inquiry found he had accepted an illegal £425,000 payment from Norwegian agent Rune Hoge following Arsenal's 1992 acquisition of John Jensen and Paul Lyderson, 2 of Hoge's clients. Graham was eventually banned for a year by the Football Association for his involvement in the scandal, after he admitted he had received an unsolicited gift from Hoge. At the time, Arsenal were struggling a little in the league, had lost a League Cup quarter-final to Liverpool, been dumped out of the FA Cup after a third-round replay by Millwall, and, as Cup Winners' Cup holders, had also lost the Super Cup to AC Milan. Regardless, Graham's sacking was more down to the illegal or brown envelopes of money, as the word bung embedded itself in the football lexicon.
Thanks for tuning into FA Cup Files, where every cup run holds a tale, and we're here to tell them all. From first whistles to last-minute winners, FA Cup Files will be here, uncovering football's finest. Subscribe and stay with us on FA Cup Files, where the magic never fades, and the legends live on.